Ithinar's Bloom, Book 1 of the Guardian Vambrace series by H. Jane Harrington. Chapter 2. Picking Up Sticks. The surefire way to spit in the face of fate is to make plans for your life. Just be prepared for fate to spit right back. Master Kezias. Here Ithinar was sure she'd heard something rustling. She reined up and erected in the saddle, heels pushing against the stirrups to allow a better view of the foggy trail ahead. Likely she was just wrestling a touch of the willies. Spending a moonless night in a creepy forest would warm up under anyone's skin. There were stories of strange creatures that dwelt in the darkness of the forest in Sectaria, monsters birthed only on moonless nights. They were called Kaio, or remnants of chaos, the remains of evil that had spilled over into the new world after the 7 gods raised the first one. Mostly myth, meant to frighten children into obedience. Kaio did exist, but they rarely ventured into settled areas. Tales of their encounters were usually blown out of proportion. They were just stories for kids, and Kier, freshly turned 19, was no longer a child. She excelled in close-quarters combat, had achieved Master Warrior status in only 2 years, and was a decent caster to boot. She didn't cotton to the superstitions of simpletons. Regardless, moonless nights were unsettling, even for her. The twin moons only set together twice per year. Kier was thankful that the biannual event was over now. Utter darkness made seeing folk blind, so she'd been forced to bed down early the night before. She'd entertained a fitful night's sleep, plagued, as usual, by horrific dreams. They weren't exactly nightmares, which played upon one's fears of the unknown. These were sleep memories. She'd take nightmares over memories any day. Hearing no more suspicious noises, Kier slipped from the saddle and stretched her legs. She removed her brown leather duster and her weathered hat, then flapped them to kick off dust. She brushed quick hands over her clothes as well. Her butternut cotton shirt and brown pants were not meant for a woman, but then she was not most women. Freeing her bound hair, Kier inhaled deeply to drink in the spring air. She loved the forest, the freedom of an open road. The 2 weeks she'd spent on the trail through the Hatchel had been wonderfully secluded and solitary. She had nothing against people in general, but trees asked no questions. Nothing had happened in Fort Hatchel before she'd departed. No suspicious gazes had been cast her way. No curious passers-by had paused to question why a woman would be traveling unescorted and armed in a backwoods part of the world. Even so, Kier almost felt as though every stranger's eye was fixed on her, and that they all could read her intentions like a scroll. She was merely indulging paranoia, expecting everyone to know exactly where she was going and what she was planning to do. Kier pulled a bladder from her saddlebags and chugged the last few drops. She led her dapple gray off-trail to the nearby creek and dipped the container into the crisp, flowing stream. As the mare watered, Kier dropped to her knees and splashed her face to cleanse away the aftermath of the night. When her ice-blue eyes met those staring back from the still pool beside her, she froze, unable to free herself from the reflection's clutches. Kier examined her countenance carefully and grimaced. The skin below her eyes was distended and ashen, evidence of the restless night. Tangled chestnut hair, wanting desperately for a rendezvous with a comb, fell around toned broad shoulders. High cheekbones and gently angular features, evidence of Cornian breeding, had once made her a handsome young woman, but the thin scar trailing down her neck and disappearing below the collar surely destroyed any remnants of beauty. The sun had bronzed once porcelain skin to a commoner's tan. No man of breeding could possibly find her attractive now. She looked more raggedy than a beggar's pocket, but her eyes didn't match the image. They poorly hid the agony and wisdom of too many years crammed prematurely into a young body. She had seen too much, and her eyes betrayed her. Scowling, Kier slapped the water. The self-portrait in the looking-glass of a humble man most clearly reflects that which he does not possess rather than that which he does, she muttered aloud, echoing Master Lai as she retied her ponytail and flopped on the ugly hat. Kier had loved that old lessons tutor. Master Lai provided her with a window to the world that was uncolored by the air of wealth and status. He'd opened Kyr's mind and allowed her to escape the invisible prison walls erected by her noble birth. Stories of adventure in exotic lands filled her childhood fantasies, and she had dreamed of taking up a sword like those heroes of olden tales. Master Lyde probably never dreamed that those stories would mirror Kyr's life, except that Kyr was no heroine, and her life had been anything but wonderful. Sure, there had been the adventure, fighting, and excitement of which she had fantasized, but life was not like the stories. There was no glamour and glory, only misery and death. Kyr stared at her palms, lost in thought. It was some time before she shook herself from the grip of the past. She shouldn't tarry. The faster she got to Findalore, the faster she'd get to the capital, High Imperia, and to the Crown Prince. A patch of undergrowth beyond the trail rustled tentatively, justifying Kyr's earlier notion. She drew her short sword and scanned the hazy dawning fog that blanketed the forest like a gentle, misty lake. Brigands, she thought with a scowl. Slipping quietly through the ferns, she whispered a binding spell, then spun and cast it immediately to the right, into the ferny brush. A muffled thump indicated success. Gliding over, Kyr hacked with her short sword until the brush fell away to reveal a young man, about her age. He sprawled like a rag doll at her feet, rendered immobile in the grip of the binding. Kyr cocked her head dumbly. He didn't look at all like a brigand. In fact, he was dressed in night clothes. His swollen bare feet, bloody and bruised, looked 7 shades of painful. He was tall and lanky, with locks of blonde corn silk plastered to his forehead, which glistened with sweat. He reminded Kyr of a stick, gangly and thin, as though he could snap at the slightest pressure. She choked back a chuckle. A stick he was indeed. The young man's sky-blue eyes harbored a deep well of intensity and strength, shadowed by anxiety. He was doing well to hide it, but Kyr lived at the bottom of the world, and she knew fear when she saw it. She released the binding and allowed him to upright, then held her blade to his throat nonchalantly. Talk fast. I'm long on journey and short on patience. What brings a rich whelp and a fancy nighty to the wild? The young man studied her keenly. His eyes attempted to read her face, then drifted to the thin scar running down her neck. My name is Vaughn. I'm running from... He paused to consider. From my past. Ain't we all, Kyr muttered, sheathing her sword. Well, Stick, since you're no brigand, I suppose I could break fast with you. Hungry? Indecision marched across his face. He looked famished, but something restrained him. He glanced around nervously, like he was expecting the very trees to jump him. I thank you for the kind offer, kind lady, Vaughn said carefully. Regretfully, I must decline. Ah, a noble, Kyr thought. Commoners rarely spoke fancy. They yammered in the rugged vernacular she'd learned to mimic, rife with local color in place of eloquence. Kyr bit back a grin. The kid was probably running from some pretty little maiden's father. Midnight tryst interrupted, he fled into the forest to avoid the father's wrath. That would explain the night clothes and bare feet. Suit yourself, but I'm running on empty. Kyr retrieved her gray, and finding a decent clearing just beyond the trail, hobbled the mare to a tree. She set about rummaging through the saddlebags for grub. Vaughn stood at the trail's edge, watching her fish out 2 pouches of jerked meat. He lingered for a moment, then began inching forward. Kyr tossed him a sack, which he caught and opened gingerly, as though it would spring to life and bite back. She collected sticks for a fire, cast an inferno wisp to ignite the tinder, and plopped unceremoniously to the ground. Vaughn approached cautiously after a moment, like a hungry, hang-tail stray inching toward an offered bone. Get off those sorry feet, Kyr told him shortly. You won't get far unless they're mended. Vaughn complied and sat, stretching his legs out, then began gnawing ravenously on the jerky. Popping a hunk in her mouth, Kyr scooted toward him on her rump. I'm not much of a healer, mind you, but I can manage something minor like this. I'm surprised you didn't heal them yourself, you being a noble and all. She rubbed her hands together and noticed Vaughn flinch at the observation. Those of breeding had greater magical abilities than the peasantry, who usually only excelled in one of the 7 typical magics. The middle and higher classes were adept at several types, and at a superior level. Even if this stick only had lower-level healing abilities, he should have been able to mend his own feet. Kyr spread her fingers, and holding them over Vaughn's injuries, began reciting the basic healing incantation she'd learned as a child. A light emanated from her cupped palms, and the torn skin began to knit together under her fingers. It was over in minutes. My sincerest appreciation, Vaughn said, glancing over his shoulder again. You're going to wear out your neck. Expecting company? The prior hesitation in Vaughn's demeanor was suddenly gone. He leaned forward with determination, as though the weight of the world was wrapped in the secret he was about to disclose. I am followed. They have tracked me before through my use of magics, and they know I am somewhere in this forest. I pray that your casting was not sensed by those from whom I flee. Kier nibbled on a carrot thoughtfully. Well, there goes the midnight rendezvous theory. I beg your pardon? Kier shrugged and tossed the remainder of the carrot to her mare. Nothing. A sudden tingling awareness at the base of her skull alerted Kier to a presence, moving upon them faster than a beggar on dropped coins. Release the boy, and you may go on your way unharmed, a disembodied voice called, reverberating through the trees like the wind chimes of oblivion.